Did you know that what you say can completely change your life? Have you ever stopped to think that your words have the power to create or destroy, heal or hurt? Jesus taught us incredible truths about this, and what he said can transform our lives. The way you live, imagine using your words to bring peace, hope, and even miracles. But be careful, because the same power that builds can also bring consequences that no one wants, because what you will discover here can change everything in your life. Imagine the beginning of it all. There was no earth, sky, stars, or light. Everything was a dark, deep, frightening void. Now close your eyes and visualize this. Suddenly, a powerful voice echoes, "Let there be light." And then, as if obeying an irresistible command, light bursts forth, shining like never before, chasing away the darkness. This wasn't just any voice. It was the voice of the Creator, God, bringing life, order, and purpose to something that until then was absolute chaos. With that simple sentence, he shaped the universe, and every detail began to emerge. The sun that warms, the stars that shine, the seas that dance, and the land that bears fruit. Everything came into existence through words, showing that they carry power, much more than we can imagine. Now think with me, why did God use words to create? He could have just thought and everything would appear, but it wasn't like that. He chose to speak. And when he spoke, his words were not just sounds in the air. They had strength, intention, and life. Just imagine, every word spoken by God had the power to transform the invisible into the visible, the impossible into the real. It is as if every sound that comes out of his mouth carries enough energy to shape mountains and make rivers flow. Isn't that impressive? God was teaching us from the beginning that words have a purpose and are building tools. And now comes the big question. If God used words to create all of this, what does that tell us? About the power we carry? Yes, because we, as his children, also use words every day. Have you ever thought about how one word you say can transform someone's life? A congratulations can make someone's day bright. A "you are important" can heal an emotional wound. But just as words can create, they can also destroy. How many times, in a moment of anger, have you said something that you wish you could take back? God showed us that words are seeds, and it is up to us to decide what we are planting. So look at your life now. What have you been doing with your words? Are we following God's example and creating good things, bringing light to times of darkness? Or are we contributing to confusion and chaos with thoughtless words? If God's words created the universe, imagine what our words can create in the small universe around us. And believe me, their impact is greater than you imagine. Now that we understand how God used words to shape the universe, let's bring this into our reality. Think about how many times in your everyday life you use words. They are everywhere. We talk, we send messages, we write, we react to situations with them. But do we stop to reflect on the impact of these words? Imagine a sad, discouraged person, and you say something like, "You're amazing, I'm here for you." Suddenly her face changes, her eyes shine, and she finds the strength to face what seemed impossible. But now imagine the opposite. Someone who is already fragile or insecure, and you criticize them harshly or even make light of them. These words, even if said without the intention of hurting, can have a profound impact, creating an emotional wound that can last for years. This power is not something new. It has been present since the beginning of humanity. When we open the Bible, we see examples of how words shaped entire stories. Remember when Moses, still unsure of his calling, received words of trust and encouragement from God? It was the word of God, spoken with authority, that gave him the courage to face Pharaoh. Now apply this to your life. How many times has someone used words to lift you up? And how many times, unfortunately, have words of discouragement pulled you down? Human words, although they do not have the divine power to create the universe, do carry the ability to transform realities, whether for good or for bad. And the most impressive thing is that often we don't even realize the impact we have with what we say. Sometimes a simple sentence said in the heat of the moment can change someone's trajectory for better or for worse. Have you ever noticed the power that "I believe in you" can have, or how silence instead of critical words can avoid a major conflict? Just as God created the universe with words, we also create or destroy small universes around us with everything we speak. It is such a great power that, if misused, it can have consequences that we cannot even imagine. Now, connecting with what we learned in the previous chapter, think. God used words to bring order and light. We, on the other hand, often use words automatically without thinking. But are we fulfilling the purpose of the words as He taught us? Are we using this power to build, encourage, and bring life? Or are we perpetuating cycles of hurt and destruction? This is a reflection that we need to carry with us. What are our words creating in the world around us? And here's the crux: responsibility. Knowing that words have power is just the beginning. The real challenge is how we use this power. Every time we speak, it's as if we're throwing a stone into a lake. Words create waves that spread far beyond what we imagine. They touch hearts, change stories, and leave marks. Have you ever tried apologizing to someone sincerely? It may be difficult at first, but a sentence like, "I'm sorry I made a mistake," it has the power to heal deep wounds and restore relationships that seemed lost. Now, imagine the opposite effect. A word spoken in anger or disdain can create a barrier that often takes years to break. And it's not just about avoiding negative words. We also need to commit to speaking positive words, even when it's difficult. The proverb that says death and life are in the power of the tongue. It's not an exaggeration. It is a truth that is reflected in our every interaction. When we praise, inspire, or encourage, we are literally bringing life to that situation. On the other hand, destructive criticism and gossip are like poisons that contaminate not only those who hear them, but also those who speak them. This leads us to wonder, are we using our words to bless or to curse? Another important aspect of responsibility in words is understanding that they have eternal weight. The Bible reminds us that we will give account for every word we speak. It's as if every sentence is a record that will remain with us. It is not a question of fear, but of awareness. Knowing that our words have eternal consequences helps us reflect before we speak. Will what we are about to say edify someone or create a burden? This type of daily reflection can completely change the way we communicate. Finally, remember that words are seeds. Every sentence you say is a seed planted in someone's life or in your own life. If we plant good seeds, we reap good fruits, healthy relationships, trust and growth. But if we plant bad seeds, the fruits can be bitter. Just as we learned from the creation of the universe, we have the privilege and responsibility to use our words to create something beautiful. Are we willing to carry this responsibility? When we think about the power of words, a verse from the Bible echoes as a profound warning. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Think about this for a moment. We're not just talking about pretty words or motivational phrases, but something much bigger. The words you choose to use can literally bring life or bring death to situations, relationships, and even your own dreams. It's like holding a button that can activate something positive or negative. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where one word changed everything? Maybe an "I believe in you" was enough to keep you going in a difficult time. Now, think about the opposite, a destructive criticism, a thoughtless comment. These words can echo in someone's mind for years, causing pain and insecurity. And it is no coincidence that the Bible highlights this in Proverbs. The tongue is a powerful tool, but also a dangerous one. When we speak without thinking, it's as if we are pouring gasoline on a fire that could have been avoided. How many fights could be avoided if words were measured? How many relationships could have been saved if, instead of attacking, we had used words of love and understanding? This is where the responsibility we talked about earlier meets wisdom. It is not enough to understand that words have power. We need to know how to use them correctly. This verse also challenges us to reflect on the impact of the words we allow into our lives. Who are the people who influence you with what they say? Have you allowed negative words to enter your heart and shape the way you see yourself? And most importantly, what words have you been saying to yourself? I am unable. I will never be good enough. These are phrases that we often repeat without realizing that we are declaring death on our own dreams and purposes. On the other hand, words of faith and trust have the power to transform our perspective and align us with God's purpose. Just as God used words to create, He has given us the ability to use them to build. Proverbs 18:21 is a clear reminder that with the tongue we can bring healing or destruction. Our words are not neutral. They carry energy, meaning, and impact. What we choose to say shapes the environment around us and directly influences the people who listen to us. Are we aware of this? And what are we creating today with what comes out of our mouths? Now let's look at the greatest example of someone who used words to bring life, Jesus. During His walk among us, He didn't just talk. His words carried such great power that they completely transformed people's reality. Imagine the scene. A Roman centurion, desperate for his servant's health, approaches Jesus and says, "One word is enough and my servant will be healed." Matthew 8:8. A single word from Jesus, spoken with love and authority, was enough to perform a miracle. And this was not an isolated case. Wherever Jesus went, His words freed, restored, and healed. But it wasn't just about physical cures. Jesus used words to reach the deepest parts of the human heart. In a society that marginalized and rejected people, He said phrases like, "Your sins are forgiven," or "Go and sin no more." These words not only offered a new beginning, but freed people from the emotional and spiritual pain that imprisoned them. Imagine the impact of this on the life of someone who lived under the weight of guilt or contempt. Jesus showed us that words can be tools of restoration and reconnection with God. And the most impressive thing is that the power of Jesus' words was not something inaccessible to us. He Himself told us, "The works that I do, you will do also, and even greater." This means that just as He used words to heal and transform, we too have this ability. But have we used our words the way Jesus taught? It may not be necessary to physically heal someone, but a simple, "I believe in you." It can heal an emotional wound that no one else sees. A word of encouragement can be the medicine someone needs to keep going. So, the question remains, how are we using our words in everyday life? Are we following Jesus' example, speaking with love, compassion, and wisdom? Or are we blurting out words that, instead of healing, hurt? Just as He brought healing with what He said, we can also do the same. The challenge is to choose to use this power intentionally, being instruments of transformation in the lives of those around us. Now that we've seen how Jesus used His words to transform lives, it's time to reflect on how we use ours. In everyday life, we are surrounded by moments that give us the opportunity to choose. Do we encourage or criticize, build or destroy? Think about common situations. Someone shares a difficulty at work, and instead of responding with compassion, it's easy to blurt out something like, "This is your fault. You should have done it differently." Words like that not only discourage you, but they can be the trigger for someone to give up on something important. But imagine if, at that very moment, you said, "You did your best, and everything will be fine." This small gesture of encouragement can completely change the situation. Jesus always knew what to say and, more importantly, how to say it. His words were measured, intentional, and loaded with purpose. He did not speak to fill the silence, but to bring about change. When He stood before a hungry crowd, He not only fed the people's bodies, but also their souls, saying, "I am the bread of life." And that is a powerful teaching for us. Are we using our words to feed hungry hearts around us? Or are we, without thinking, blurting out phrases that hurt, cut, and cause even more emotional and spiritual hunger? The rush of everyday life often makes us forget the power that words have. We are so immersed in our routines that we react automatically without thinking about the consequences of what we say. Words like, "you are useless," or "you always do everything wrong." They may seem harmless to the speaker, but they carry a devastating weight to the listener. It's like throwing stones at a fragile vase, causing cracks that are not always visible but can be deep. On the other hand, a simple, "I support you," or "you will make it," it can be like a balm, healing wounds that not even time can touch. If we look at the example of Jesus, we understand that speaking with intention does not just mean saying beautiful things, but choosing words that bring transformation. Every conversation, every interaction is a chance to plant something meaningful in someone's life. Are we choosing our words with purpose, as He taught us? Or are we blurting out words without thinking, which can hurt more than we realize? This is the calling, to use our words as instruments of healing and growth, just as Jesus did. And this is exactly what James warns us about, the danger of an uncontrolled tongue. He compares the tongue to a fire, small but capable of destroying entire forests. Think about it. A seemingly insignificant spark can cause a fire that consumes everything around it. That's what happens when we speak without thinking. A word spoken in the heat of emotion can generate wounds that last a lifetime. How many friendships have been broken? How many marriages ruined? How many family ties broken because of something said at the wrong time? Tiago is not exaggerating. He is showing us that the tongue, despite being small, has a gigantic impact. And Tiago goes further. He says the tongue is like the rudder of a ship, small but capable of guiding an entire vessel, whether in calm waters or storms. This means that even in the midst of chaos, we can choose the path our words will take. A word of calm in the middle of an argument can steer the ship from a disastrous collision. On the other hand, words of anger or accusation can cause that same ship to sink. James is calling us to responsibility, reminding us that if we don't control our tongue, it will control us. And here's the most challenging point. Controlling our tongue is not something we do alone. James recognizes that it is a difficult task, almost impossible without God's help. How many times have we promised ourselves that we will be more careful about what we say, but in the heat of a moment of frustration, we blurt out words that we immediately want to take back? This is why we need to seek divine wisdom. Ask God to help us tame this small but powerful tool He gave us, because once the words come out, we can't take them back. So how can we prevent language from wreaking havoc? The answer lies in constant vigilance and the practice of replacing impulses with reflection. Before speaking, we must ask ourselves, that is true? Is it necessary? Will it bring peace or pain? James teaches us that the tongue is treacherous and needs to be tamed, but when we can control it, it can become a powerful instrument of edification. So just as a fire can heat or destroy, it is up to us to choose what we will do with the power we have in our words. Imagine an immense ship sailing on an infinite ocean. Despite its gigantic size, all that determines where it goes is a small rudder. This is the example that James uses to talk about language. It may seem small and insignificant, but it guides the course of our lives. And what does this mean for us? It means that every word we speak, even the ones that seem small, has the power to change the direction of situations, relationships, and even destinies. Think about a fight, for example. How many times has a word spoken at the wrong time turned something small into a huge problem? Just as a rudder can guide a ship to a safe harbor or a shipwreck, our tongue has the same power. What makes this example even more interesting is that the rudder only fulfills its function when guided by a pilot. In our lives, this pilot is us, but we also need God as the captain who guides us. Without steering, the rudder loses control, and the ship becomes adrift. The same is true with language. When we speak without reflecting or seeking wisdom from God, our words can lead us into unnecessary storms. And most importantly, even words spoken without the intention of hurting can have profound impacts. Have you ever heard someone say, "I didn't mean to say that. It was accidental." But for those listening, the damage has already been done. Therefore, Tiago reminds us of the importance of controlling the rudder carefully. Controlling your tongue is a daily exercise, and it is not easy. After all, the language is fast, impulsive, and often speaks before the mind has time to reflect. It's like a ship in the middle of a storm. The pilot needs to be steady to not let the rudder slip out of his hands. This firmness only comes with practice and God's help. It is He who gives us the wisdom to choose words that edify, that bring peace, and that avoid unnecessary emotional collisions. And here's the part that challenges us. If we know that the rudder steers the ship and that the tongue guides our lives, why do we often act as if it doesn't matter? Have we been paying attention to the direction we are taking with our words? Just as a captain never takes his eyes off the horizon, we also need to pay attention to every word that comes out of our mouths. Each phrase is like a command to the rudder, guiding the course of not only our lives, but also the lives of those who listen to us. And this is exactly where wisdom comes in. The Bible, especially the book of Proverbs, teaches us that true wisdom lies in how we use our words. Have you ever noticed how wise advice can completely change the course of a situation? Imagine someone about to make a hasty decision. One right word, said at the right time, can prevent disaster. Proverbs teaches us that he who guards his mouth guards his life, showing that speaking less and more carefully is not just a virtue, but a necessity. The wise man does not speak on impulse. He chooses each word like a sculptor who shapes his work with precision. This idea is deeply linked to patience and self-control. Speaking less does not mean not expressing yourself, but rather thinking before speaking. And that's a lesson we all need to learn. How many times in an argument do we feel the need to respond immediately, without thinking about the consequences of what we are saying? But Proverbs warns us even a fool, when he remains silent, is considered wise. Silence, in many cases, is more powerful than 1,000 words spoken without reflection. And what differentiates the words of a wise man from those of someone who speaks without thinking? The intention. Wise words have a purpose: to build, edify, and guide. They are like a light that illuminates the path in moments of darkness. On the other hand, thoughtless words are like thorns that hurt, leaving marks that can take years to heal. When we speak wisely, our words become instruments of peace, capable of transforming even the most difficult situations. But are we willing to seek this wisdom, or do we prefer to continue talking without measuring the impacts? Proverbs invites us to reflect on the power of silence and the strength of a well-chosen word. In a world where everyone seems to have something to say, true wisdom lies in speaking less, but speaking better. Every word is a seed, and every silence is an opportunity to listen more and learn. Thus, the wise man not only preserves his life, but also transforms the lives of those around him. Are we ready to accept this challenge and seek the wisdom that comes from above? If we learn that words have the power to create or destroy, we also need to recognize that at certain times, silence speaks louder than any sentence. Think about it. Silence can be an intentional response, filled with wisdom and purpose. One of the most striking examples of this is in the life of Jesus. During his trial, he was confronted by accusations, insults, and provocations. Pilate and the religious leaders expected a reaction, but Jesus remained silent. This attitude was not passive, but powerful. Jesus' silence spoke of his confidence in God's plan and his ability not to be shaken by external pressures. Many times in our lives, we face situations in which an impulsive reaction seems inevitable. In a moment of anger or confrontation, we feel the need to defend ourselves, to respond in the same tone. But that is exactly where silence can be our greatest demonstration of strength. James 1:19 teaches us to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. This biblical wisdom reminds us that by choosing silence, we avoid words that could cause further pain or fuel conflict. Silence in this context is not absence, but an act of control and balance. Furthermore, silence has the power to disarm. Imagine a heated confrontation. One person is shouting, waiting for a response. When the other chooses silence, something changes. The energy of the discussion is interrupted because there is no fuel for the fire. Silence creates a space for reflection, where hasty words have no place. It's not easy to remain silent when emotions are running high, but that's when silence becomes a powerful tool to bring peace and avoid words that we might later regret. And the amazing thing is that silence not only disarms others, but also gives us time to listen to God. It is in silence that we can reflect, seek direction, and allow God to speak to our hearts. Ecclesiastes 3:7 says, "There is a time to be silent and a time to speak." Knowing the difference between these moments is the key to a balanced life. When we silence our words, we make room for the Holy Spirit to guide us and show us what should be said, when, and how. Thus, silence is not just a pause, but an act of faith and trust in God's control. And it is precisely in controlling His words that Jesus gives us another powerful example, the confrontation with evil. During His ministry, He was repeatedly challenged by religious leaders who attempted to use words to manipulate or discredit Him. But Jesus never fell into traps. His answers were neither impulsive nor empty. They were loaded with authority, truth, and wisdom. In Matthew 23, we see Jesus confront the Pharisees, calling them hypocrites and whitewashed tombs. His words were not to humiliate, but to expose the truth and offer an opportunity for repentance. Jesus understood that words have the power to reveal what is hidden. When He confronted evil, His words were like a light that illuminated people's hearts, revealing their intentions. The Pharisees used words to manipulate, impose fear, and maintain control, but Jesus used His words to liberate. Imagine the courage it took to speak such incisive truths in a context where His words could cost His life. He was not afraid because His words were not motivated by anger or pride, but by love and justice. This example teaches us that at times we need to use our words to confront what is wrong. This does not mean speaking with anger or arrogance, but with the firmness of someone who seeks to bring to light what needs to be transformed. How many times do we avoid confronting an injustice for fear of how our words will be received? But Jesus shows us that silence and words have their moments. When we confront evil with words of truth, we are following His example of using His words as a tool for change. However, we also learn from Jesus that confrontation with words must be guided by love. He never spoke to destroy, but to reveal and redeem. Even in the face of the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, His words offered a chance for change. And this is the great challenge for us, to speak the truth in love, as Ephesians 4:15 says. Have we used our words to confront evil with wisdom and compassion? Or without realizing it, do we end up fueling evil with words of anger and judgment? Jesus invites us to use our words as He did, with courage, truth, and purpose, always pointing toward the light. After understanding how words can transform the world around us, we need to turn our eyes within ourselves. How many times do we find ourselves saying negative things about ourselves? I'll never make it, I'm a failure, or nothing goes right for me. These phrases, whether repeated in our thoughts or spoken out loud, have a devastating impact. Proverbs 23:7 says, "As he thinks in his soul, so is he." In other words, what you repeat to yourself shapes who you believe you are. This internal dialogue is like a constant soundtrack in your mind, and if we don't pay attention, we could be feeding a distorted view of ourselves. This type of negative thinking is not something that appears suddenly. It is cultivated over time, often by words we hear from others. Comments like, "You will never be good enough," or "This is not for you," they can become truths that we carry within us. The problem is that when we believe these words, we begin to act as if they are real. Insecurity grows, dreams become more distant, and we convince ourselves that we are not capable. It is a cycle that can only be broken when we choose to replace these negative words with truths that come from God. God never called us incapable or defeated. On the contrary, His words about us are full of love and purpose. He says we are more than winners, Romans 8:37, and that we can all things through Him who strengthens us, Philippians 4:13. These promises are like anchors, holding us steady when the tide of negative thoughts tries to sweep us away. But to do so, we need to take ownership of them. The first step to transforming our internal dialogue is to align our words with what God has already declared about us. When we start to say, "I am capable because God strengthens me," our actions and beliefs begin to change. This process requires practice and patience, but it is absolutely transformative. Every time we replace a negative word with a truth from God, we are rebuilding our identity based on what He thinks of us, not what the world says. What have you been saying to yourself today? Are your inner words reflecting God's vision for your life, or are they fueling doubts and fears? The impact of what we say to ourselves is as profound as the impact of the words we say to others. And this invites us to take extra care with every thought and statement we cultivate. And when we allow our words to reflect what God has done in our lives, something incredible happens. They become a testimony. Think about how many times you have been impacted by the story of someone who faced difficulties but found the strength in God to overcome. These words are powerful because they show that God continues to act, that He is not distant but present in every detail. In Revelation 12:11 we read that they overcame Him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Testimony is not just a report, it is a spiritual weapon capable of edifying, encouraging, and transforming lives. But sometimes we underestimate the power of sharing our own stories. We think that our testimony is not significant enough, or that we don't have something big to tell. But the truth is that every detail matters. When someone hears how God helped you through a difficult time, that might be exactly what they needed to keep believing. The Apostle Paul understood this very well. On several occasions, he shared how God transformed his life, taking him from the path of persecutor to that of apostle. His story was not about him, but about what God did through him, and that is what makes the testimony so powerful. Sharing our experiences with God is not just about telling something that happened. It is a way of glorifying God and showing that His grace is real and accessible to everyone. Maybe you think, but I don't know how to start. Start with something simple. Think of a situation in which you clearly saw God's hand at work, whether in a miracle or in an everyday detail. When you share this with someone else, you are planting a seed of faith in their heart. You are saying, if God did it for me, He can do it for you too. And the most interesting thing is that by sharing, you are also edified. Remembering what God has already done in your life renews your faith and confidence that He will continue to act. Each testimony is living proof that God is present and that His promises are fulfilled. Just like Paul, you can use your words to inspire, motivate, and strengthen the faith of others. After all, your story with God can be the key to opening doors that someone around you didn't even know existed. What is your story? Is it time to share it to impact lives around you? When understanding the power of words, an important question arises. How can we use them to restore what has been broken? In a world full of conflict, misunderstandings and frayed relationships, words have the ability to build bridges where there were once walls. Think of a situation in which a simple "forgive me" could change everything. These two words, spoken sincerely, have the power to disarm hardened hearts and open paths to reconciliation. In 2 Corinthians 5:18, Paul reminds us that God has entrusted us with the ministry of reconciliation. This means that our words have the potential to reflect God's love and restore even the most damaged relationships. But it's not easy to take the first step, is it? Oftentimes, pride or fear prevents us from saying what needs to be said. Sometimes we prefer silence rather than risk exposing our feelings or admitting our mistakes. However, it is exactly in these moments that God invites us to act with courage and humility. Remember Jesus with Peter. After the resurrection, Jesus did not ignore the fact that Peter had denied him. Instead, he called him to a restorative conversation. When asking, "You love me?" John 21:15-17, Jesus gave Peter the opportunity to reaffirm his faith and restore their relationship. This story teaches us that words of restoration do not need to be complicated or elaborate. What matters is the intention behind them. When we say something like, "I'm sorry about what happened, let's start over," we are creating a healing space for both those who listen and those who speak. Sometimes what we need most to restore a relationship is to be willing to listen empathetically and speak sincerely. Words like, "I understand you," or "Thank you for listening to me." They may seem simple, but they carry an emotional weight that has the power to transform the dynamics of a relationship. And it is important to remember that restoring does not mean erasing the past, but building something new from it. Just as Jesus gave Peter a new purpose, our words can give new perspectives to situations that seemed hopeless. Have we used our words to heal wounds and build bridges? Or without realizing it, do we continue to feed pride and separation? Restoring with words is an act of love, and in doing so, we reflect the heart of God, who constantly seeks to reconcile us with Him. Now, imagine this. Every word we've ever said being laid out before us. This is exactly what Jesus warns us about in Matthew 12:36-37. On the day of judgment, people will give account for every useless word they have spoken. Sounds scary, doesn't it? But in fact, it is a call to reflect on the weight of each sentence that comes out of our mouths. Our words are not just sounds that disappear into thin air. They have eternal consequences. Every conversation, every comment, every promise will be brought to light at the final judgment. And what does this mean in practice? It means that our words reveal who we are inside. After all, as Jesus said, the mouth speaks out of what the heart is full of. Matthew 12:34. It's not just the big statements we make, but the everyday words we often say without thinking. Angry words, gossip, lies, destructive criticism, they all leave marks, both on those who listen and on those who speak. The final judgment is not just about what we did, but about what we said, because our words are a reflection of our heart. But here's the bright side. The final judgment is also a time of reward. Words that edified, that encouraged, that brought hope and love will also be remembered. Every time you said "God bless you" with sincerity, every word of comfort to someone in pain, every sentence that brought peace in the midst of chaos. All of this will be counted as a testimony of faith and love. This shows us that, in addition to watching our words, we have the opportunity to use them to build an eternal legacy. Therefore, the question that remains is, what have our words revealed about us? Have they been seeds of life or instruments of destruction? At the final judgment, our words will not just be analyzed, they will be witnesses for or against us. Knowing this should not fill us with fear, but with responsibility. Every day is a new chance to use our words to glorify God and positively impact those around us. After all, if we know that our words have eternal weight, shouldn't we use them more wisely? If our words have the power to shape lives and create realities, imagine the impact when they are guided by faith. In Romans 10:9, the Bible teaches us, "If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." This shows that the language of faith is not just about what we believe in our hearts, but also about what we declare with our lips. Confession of faith is the first step to aligning our words with God's promises and beginning to transform our reality. But what does it mean in practice to speak with faith? It means declaring what we do not yet see as if it were already real, trusting fully in God. Think of Abraham, called father of many nations before even having a single child. God changed his name as a statement of faith, showing that what he promised would happen. So are our words. Every time we confess God's promises, we are building something that, even invisible at the moment, is fully real in the spiritual realm. But have we used our words to declare faith, or have we allowed doubt and fear to dominate our speech? The challenge with the language of faith is that it demands complete trust in God, even when circumstances seem to say otherwise. It's easy to speak in faith when everything is going well, but it's in difficult times that our words have the greatest impact. Instead of saying, "This is impossible," the language of faith declares, "All things are possible for him who believes," Mark 9:23. Instead of, "I am alone," we say, "God is my refuge and strength," Psalm 46:1. These statements not only strengthen our trust in God, but also shape our mindset and the environment around us. And the most impressive thing is that the language of faith not only transforms the speaker, but also deeply impacts the listener. When we boldly proclaim God's truths, we encourage others to do the same. It's like a flame that spreads, illuminating lives and strengthening hearts. What have you confessed with your lips? Do your words reflect faith in the God who can do all things, or do they reveal doubts and limitations? Just as Jesus' words brought healing and life, our words, guided by faith, can also bring transformation and hope. And if our words have the power to transform the external, they have an even more profound impact when turned inward. Internal dialogue, those conversations we have in our thoughts, is perhaps one of the most powerful forms of communication. Proverbs 23:7 says, "As he thinks in his soul, so is he." This means that what you repeat to yourself shapes not only your mind, but also your identity and actions. But if we're honest, this internal dialogue is often filled with doubt, criticism, and fear. Phrases like, "I'm not good enough," or "I'll never make it," they create an internal environment of discouragement that keeps us away from God's purpose. This kind of thinking doesn't come out of nowhere. It is fueled by negative experiences, other people's words, or even our own tendency to focus on failures. But here's the good news. We can change this conversation. It's not about ignoring our challenges or pretending everything is fine, but about replacing destructive thoughts with God's truth. Instead of saying, "I am weak," declare, "When I am weak, then I am strong." 2 Corinthians 12:10. Instead of thinking, "I will never get over this," remember, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Philippians 4:13. Transforming internal dialogue is a daily and intentional process. It begins with renewing the mind, as Paul instructs us in Romans 12:2. Transform yourselves by renewing your mind. This means filling our thoughts with God's word until his truths become stronger than our doubts. Think of each thought as a seed. If we plant seeds of doubt and fear, we will reap insecurity and discouragement. But if we plant words of faith and trust, we will reap courage and purpose. What have you been sowing in your mind lately? And the impact goes beyond ourselves. When we change our internal dialogue, it is reflected in our actions, words, and even how we relate to others. People who have a healthy self-talk tend to be more encouraging, compassionate, and confident, What God says about you is much more powerful than any criticism or doubt you may have. It's time to align your thoughts with God's promises and let this internal dialogue transform your life from the inside out. If self-talk reflects our personal journey of faith, sharing testimony is bringing that experience to others. Think about how a simple story can touch hearts, renew hopes, and even transform lives. When you share how God acted in your life, you are showing that He is not just a distant concept, but a living God who intervenes in the reality of those who trust in Him. In Revelation 12:11 we read that they overcame Him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. This shows that testimony is not just a report, it is a spiritual weapon capable of strengthening the faith of those who hear and those who speak. We often underestimate the power of our own story. We think that because it does not have spectacular miracles or grandiose events, it is not significant. But what makes testimony powerful is not the size of the event, but God's faithfulness in every detail. An example of this is in John 9, when a man born blind was healed by Jesus. When asked by the Pharisees how that happened, he simply replied, "I know one thing, I was blind, and now I see." His story was straightforward, but full of transformation. Likewise, every small victory in our lives, every moment we saw God's hand, is a story worth sharing. And the amazing thing is that as we witness, we not only build others up, but we also strengthen our own faith. Remembering what God has already done in our lives is like fanning a flame that sometimes seems to diminish in the face of daily challenges. By telling our story, we declare that God remains faithful, that He is in control, and that His promises never fail. It is a way of glorifying Him, but also of reminding ourselves that if He acted in the past, He will certainly act in the future. Testimony is, therefore, a bridge that connects our personal experience to the hope of those who listen to us. And this leads us to an essential question. Have we shared what God has done in our lives? It doesn't have to be in a pulpit or in front of a crowd. It could be in a conversation with a friend, a family member, or even a stranger who needs to hear about God's faithfulness. Your story, as simple as it may seem, could be the answer someone is looking for. When we let our words be used by God, they become more than words. They become seeds of faith planted in hearts that need encouragement. If witnessing is sharing what God has done, words of restoration are an essential step toward healing relationships and creating new connections. We live in a world where disagreements, hurts, and distances are inevitable, but we are also called to be agents of reconciliation. In 2 Corinthians 5:18, Paul reminds us that God has given us the ministry of reconciliation, which means that our words have the power to build bridges where chasms once existed. A simple, "Forgive me," or "I understand you," it may be enough to begin to restore something that seemed lost. The most striking example of this is in Jesus, especially in His interaction with Peter. After the resurrection, Jesus did not ignore the fact that Peter had denied Him 3 times. Instead, He chose a moment of restoration, asking Peter, "You love me?" John 21:15-17. With these words, Jesus not only restored the relationship, but also gave Peter a new purpose. This teaches us that words of reconciliation do not need to be complex or elaborate. They need to be sincere. They carry the power to bring healing and renew perspectives. But to restore, it takes courage. Often, pride or fear prevents us from taking the first step. We prefer silence to the risk of being rejected or misunderstood. However, Jesus shows us that restoration begins with humility and love. When we choose to ask for forgiveness or offer words of reconciliation, we are reflecting God's own heart, which constantly seeks to reconcile us with Him. How many opportunities for restoration do we miss by not saying what should be said? Sometimes words like, "I miss you," or "let's try again," can completely change the course of a relationship. Restoring is not forgetting the past, but building something new from it. Just as Jesus gave Peter a new mission, our words can open doors to new beginnings. What have we done with our words? Are we using them to build bridges or to build walls? The call to restoration is more than a human gesture. It is a reflection of Jesus' ministry, which teaches us that, with love and the right words, it is possible to heal wounds and transform even the most difficult relationships. When we reflect on the power of words, it is impossible to ignore the warning Jesus gives us. In Matthew 12:36-37, "I tell you that on the day of judgment, men will give account for every useless word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." This is deep and serious. Every word that comes out of our mouth is recorded, and on the day of judgment it will be brought to light. This should not cause us fear, but awaken in us a sense of responsibility for what we say. Are we using our words to build or to destroy? Think about how many times words spoken in the heat of the moment have caused pain or created division. A thoughtless comment, gossip, or even a seemingly harmless lie can leave deep marks. These words, which we often forget in our daily lives, do not disappear for God. They are like seeds, which in the final judgment will reveal the fruits they have produced. Jesus teaches us that the mouth speaks out of the abundance of the heart. Matthew 12:34. Our words, therefore, are a direct reflection of what is within us. What have they revealed about our character and our faith? But the final judgment is not just about condemnation. It will also be a time of reward for those who used their words for good. Every word of encouragement, every prayer said for another, every moment you chose to speak with wisdom and love, it will all be remembered. It is a reminder that our words carry eternal weight, both for the glory of God and for the impact we leave on those around us. This understanding challenges us to be more intentional in our conversations and turn every word into an opportunity to bless. And this leads us to an inevitable reflection. What do our words say about who we are? Have they reflected a heart full of God or a heart full of pride, anger, or indifference? Will what we have said be a witness for us or against us on the day of judgment? Knowing that we will account for every word is not a threat, but a call to vigilance and wisdom. Each day is a new chance to use our words to glorify God and to plant seeds of eternal life in our path and in the hearts of those who hear us. And it is precisely in this context that the language of faith becomes so essential. In Romans 10:9-10, Paul reminds us that confessing with the mouth and believing in the heart are inseparable elements of salvation. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. This means that our words are not just reflections of what we believe, but also tools for declaring and solidifying our faith. Confession of faith is a demonstration of trust in God and an affirmation that his promises are real and true. The language of faith is not just for moments of celebration, but especially for moments of challenge. When we face difficulties, our words can be the difference between sinking under our circumstances or rising above them. By declaring what God promises, we align our mind and spirit with his truth. Instead of saying, "I can't deal with this," faith says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Philippians 4:13. Instead of "that will never change," we declare, "I know that my Redeemer lives." Job 19:25. This change in speech reflects trust in the God who never fails. And the amazing thing is that when we speak in faith, we not only change our perspective, but we also impact those around us. Your words of faith may be exactly what someone needs to hear to renew hope. Imagine saying to someone, "God is in control, he is working for you." These words can bring comfort that no logical explanation could offer. It is the power of faith in action, not just in our hearts, but overflowing to touch lives and inspire others to trust in God. The question that remains is, what have we confessed? Do our words reflect faith in a great God, capable of doing the impossible, or have we allowed doubt and fear to shape our speech? The language of faith is not about denying reality, but about affirming God's higher truth about it. Just as Abraham trusted in God when everything seemed unlikely, we are called to declare with our lips and believe with our hearts that at the right time, God's promises will be fulfilled. What are you saying today about what God can do in your life? If our words reflect our faith and play a role in final judgment, they also carry an eternal impact on everything around us. Proverbs 18:21 reminds us, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." This means that every word we speak has the potential to build something lasting or to destroy profoundly. It's not just about now, but about what we leave behind. Our words are seeds that germinate, grow, and produce fruit, good or bad. Think about how many lives have been marked by words of encouragement or wounded by words of criticism. What are you planting with what you say? Imagine a simple conversation, perhaps with a colleague or a friend. Something that seems trivial to you, like a compliment or a word of gratitude, can become unforgettable for those who hear it. Maybe it's exactly what that person needed at that moment. On the other hand, a thoughtless criticism or a word said in the heat of the moment can leave marks that take years to disappear. This is the power we carry, an impact that goes beyond what we can see or measure. Our words have the ability to cross time and remain in people's hearts. And the eternal impact of words is not limited to our human relationships. When we declare God's truth and proclaim His promises, we are leaving a spiritual legacy. Every time we pray for someone, every time we talk about the love of Christ, we are participating in something much bigger than ourselves. We are helping to plant seeds of faith that can lead a soul to salvation, and this has incalculable value. What we say here on earth echoes in heaven because God values our words of faith and our efforts to bring life to the people around us. So what are we building with our words? Have they been instruments of edification or weapons of destruction? If we understand that our words have an eternal impact, we will be more careful and intentional in how we use them. Every conversation, every message, every prayer is an opportunity to leave a legacy that glorifies God and transforms lives. Have we taken advantage of these opportunities, or have we allowed useless and empty words to take the place of words that could make a difference? And if the eternal impact of words is so significant, it's only natural that the Bible invites us to control our tongues. James 3:6 compares the tongue to a fire, small but capable of causing great destruction. It's a powerful image, which reminds us that just as a spark can set an entire forest on fire, a misplaced word can cause immense damage. But controlling the tongue is not easy. How many times have we promised ourselves that we would be more careful, only to, in the heat of a moment, say something that we immediately regret? This challenge is real, and Tiago warns us about its importance. Controlling your tongue doesn't just mean avoiding offensive or negative words. It also means speaking wisely, carefully choosing what to say and when to say it. James teaches us that, just as a small rudder guides a large ship, the tongue also controls the direction of our lives. But to do this, we need to be intentional. Before speaking, we must ask ourselves, that is true. Is it necessary? Are you going to build? This pause for reflection can avoid many conflicts and help us build healthier and more meaningful relationships. And here's an essential point. Controlling your tongue is not something we can do alone. We need God's help to tame this small but powerful organ. In our own efforts, we are often carried away by emotions, external pressures, or momentary impulses. But when we ask the Holy Spirit to guide our words, He gives us wisdom and self-control. In Psalm 141:3, David prays, "Set a guard over my mouth, Lord. Watch the door of my lips." This prayer reminds us that control of the tongue begins with dependence on God. When we choose to control our tongue, we are demonstrating spiritual maturity. We are telling the world that we prefer peace to discord, truth to lies, and love to pride. It is not an easy path, but it is a necessary path for those who wish to live according to God's principles. Our words have power, and when guided by divine wisdom, they can be tools for transformation. Are we ready for this daily challenge of watching what comes out of our mouths and using our words as instruments of edification? If we learn that our words have the power to destroy, we also discover that they have immense potential to heal. Imagine an invisible wound, not in the body, but in the heart. How many times has a word of affection or support been like a balm for someone who was emotionally hurt? Proverbs 16:24 says, "Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweet for the soul and medicine for the body." This verse reminds us that just as medicine brings relief to the body, our words have the power to mend broken hearts and lift up those who have fallen. Jesus is the greatest example of how words can bring healing. Wherever he went, he not only touched people physically, but also used words of love and authority to transform their lives. A striking example is in Mark 5:34, when he says to the woman who had been healed of a hemorrhage, "Daughter, your faith healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." This phrase not only declared her physical healing, but also brought peace to her spirit. It's a reminder that our words can go beyond what we see and reach the souls of those who need comfort. And in our daily lives, how many times do we miss the opportunity to use our words to heal because we are distracted or only focused on ourselves? A simple sentence like, "I believe in you," or "You are not alone," can make an unimaginable difference. We don't need to be experts or have all the answers. Sometimes just being present and saying something sincerely is enough to ease someone's pain. But this requires sensitivity and attention. Have we listened to the needs of the people around us? Or are we so busy that we forget the impact our words can have? Words that heal are intentional. They are chosen carefully and spoken with love. They not only encourage, but also bring hope to those who have lost the strength to believe. When we allow ourselves to be used by God to speak life and healing, we become His instruments on earth. What have you been talking about lately? Have your words lifted those around you or helped them stay hurt? Like Jesus, we are called to speak with compassion and purpose, turning every conversation into an opportunity to bring healing and renewal. And if there is one word that has an extraordinary power to heal, that word is forgiveness. Forgiving or asking for forgiveness is not just an act of humility. It is an act of liberation. When Jesus was on the cross, in the midst of pain and rejection, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23:34. These words, spoken in the most difficult moment of his life, demonstrate that forgiveness is a choice that transcends human logic. Forgiving does not mean ignoring the mistake or minimizing the pain, but deciding not to allow that pain to continue imprisoning us. But forgiveness is not just about the other. He also heals ourselves. Holding a grudge is like carrying a weight that prevents us from moving forward. Words like "I forgive you" or "forgive me," they have the power to break down barriers that often keep us stuck in past hurts. In Matthew 6:14-15, Jesus teaches us that if we forgive those who offend us, we will also be forgiven by the Father. This shows us that forgiveness is not just an emotional benefit, but an attitude that has profound spiritual implications. And ask for forgiveness? This is an act that requires courage and humility. Admitting a mistake can be uncomfortable, but the words, "I made a mistake, forgive me," they have the power to restore relationships and heal wounds that might otherwise last a lifetime. Asking for forgiveness is acknowledging our fallibility, but it is also an essential step toward rebuilding bridges that have been burned. How many times do we fail to ask for forgiveness out of pride or fear, even though we know that these words could bring relief and reconciliation? Forgiveness is more than a word, it's a daily choice. We choose to free each other and ourselves from the chains of hurt and guilt. Our words have the power to begin this process. When we choose to speak forgiveness, we make space for peace, reconciliation, and love. Have we used this power in our lives? Just as Jesus taught us to forgive, we are called to reflect that love and bring healing through our words of forgiveness. When we talk about the power of words, it is impossible not to think about God's promises. The Bible is full of examples of how His words are fulfilled, regardless of time or circumstances. Hebrews 10:23 reminds us, "Let us hold fast to the hope we profess, for He who promised is faithful." God doesn't just make promises, He keeps them perfectly. His words are not empty or uncertain, they carry the assurance of His faithfulness. But have we trusted these promises, or let circumstances make us doubt? Think of Abraham, who was promised to be the father of many nations when he was advanced in years, and his wife Sarah was barren. Humanly speaking, it was impossible, but God had promised, and Abraham chose to trust, even without understanding how that would be possible. His faith was demonstrated not only in his heart, but also in his words and actions. He did not deny the circumstances, but chose to believe God's word above all else. This trust teaches us that even when everything around us seems contrary, God's promises remain. And what does this mean for us? It means that our words need to be aligned with God's promises. When we face challenges, instead of saying, "I see no way out," we must declare God is in control. Instead of, "That will never change," we proclaim, "Everything works together for good for those who love God." Romans 8:28. This change in the way we speak is not only a demonstration of faith, but also a testimony to those around us. When our words reflect God's promises, we are spreading hope and strengthening our own confidence. But trusting God's promises does not mean the path will be easy. There is often a gap between promise and fulfillment, and it is in this space that our faith is tested. In these moments, what we say has an even greater impact. Are we proclaiming faith or doubt? The words we choose can bring us closer or further away from fulfilling the promise. Just as Abraham stood firm, we are called to declare God's faithfulness in the midst of uncertainty, trusting that His words never fail. And if the words we speak have so much power, it's because they are a direct reflection of what's inside us. Jesus was clear when He said, "The mouth speaks out of what the heart is full of." Matthew 12:34. This means that our words are not just sounds, but the expression of what is within us. When we speak with love, patience, or faith, we are revealing a heart aligned with God. But when our words are full of criticism, anger, or pessimism, this also reflects the state of our inner self. What have our words revealed? It is impossible to separate words from the heart. What we say is a window into our deepest emotions, thoughts, and beliefs. Therefore, the process of transforming our words begins with transforming our hearts. And this is only possible when we get closer to God and allow Him to shape our interior. In Psalm 51:10, David prays a powerful prayer, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." When we seek this renewal, our words naturally begin to reflect this change. And how can we identify the state of our heart? Just pay attention to the words that come out of our mouths. Phrases like, "I'll never make it," or "Nothing goes right for me." They reveal a heart that needs to be strengthened by God's truth. On the other hand, words of encouragement and faith show that the heart is full of hope that comes from the Lord. This is why reading the Bible, prayer, and communion with God are so essential. They feed our hearts with what is good, true, and pure, and this overflows into our words. Transforming the heart is a daily and continuous process. Just as a fountain cannot flow clean and dirty water at the same time, our words will only be consistent when our heart is aligned with God. So, as you listen to your own words, ask yourself, what does that say about the state of my heart? This is the first step in allowing God to transform your interior and consequently your words. Because in the end, our words are not just about what we say, but about who we are in Christ. If our words reflect what is in our hearts, imagine the impact of a heart full of hope. The Bible teaches us that hope is an anchor for the soul, Hebrews 6:19, and this anchor is often manifested through what we say. Think about a moment of despair when someone around you was on the verge of giving up. A sentence like, "I believe in you," or "God has a purpose for your life." It may be enough to bring back the courage that was disappearing. These are words that sow hope in lands that seem arid and lifeless. Jesus was a master at planting hope with his words. When he said to Lazarus, "Get out," John 11:43, he not only brought Lazarus back to life, but also renewed the faith of those around him. His words always pointed to the future, to the possibility of the impossible, to the light in the midst of darkness. He didn't ignore difficulties, but he used every situation as an opportunity to remind people that with God, there is always hope. Are we following this example in our daily conversations? We sow hope, not just with big speeches, but with small verbal gestures. A simple "you are loved" or "God has not forgotten you." It can transform someone's day. These seeds, even though they may seem small, have the potential to grow and bear fruit that impacts lives for a long time. But to sow hope, we need to be aware of the needs of the people around us. Often, what someone needs most is not a practical solution, but a word that rekindles their trust in God. And here's the challenging part. Have our words conveyed hope? Or without realizing it, are we sowing doubt, fear, or discouragement? The choice is ours. Just as Jesus spoke life in seemingly unsolvable situations, we are called to use our words to bring hope, even when everything seems lost. Every sentence we say is an opportunity to remind someone that God is in control and that there is a purpose in every circumstance. But just as important as knowing what to say is knowing when not to say anything. Silence is often more powerful than any words. In moments of conflict or pain, choosing silence can be an act of wisdom and love. Think about Jesus during his trial. When confronted with false accusations, he did not respond with anger or defense. Instead, he remained silent. Matthew 27:12. This silence was not an absence of response, but a demonstration of control and trust in God's plan. Silence can also be a tool to avoid unnecessary conflicts. How many times in an argument are we tempted to respond impulsively? However, the Bible teaches us to be slow to speak and slow to anger. James 1:19. Choosing silence in these moments does not mean weakness, but strength. It is the ability to resist the temptation to fight back, to wait for the right moment, and to allow God to act in the situation. It is an act of faith as we trust that we do not always need to have the last word. Furthermore, silence allows us to hear better, both to others and to God. Often we are so preoccupied with speaking that we don't realize what the other person really needs or what God is trying to tell us. Silence creates space for reflection, understanding, and empathy. It is in this space that we find wisdom and direction. Have we practiced silence when necessary? Or have we spoken on impulse without considering the impact of our words? And finally, silence is also a form of healing. In moments of deep pain, we don't need to have all the answers or say something that fills the void. Sometimes being present in silence is the greatest demonstration of love we can offer. Just as Jesus used silence to convey strength and confidence, we are also called to recognize the power of this act in our own lives. Because in silence, God speaks, and in silence, we find peace. If our words have the power to create, heal, and restore, then wisdom in using them is essential. Proverbs 10:19 teaches us, "When there are many words, sin is present, but he who controls the tongue is prudent." Speaking less and with more intention is one of the marks of wisdom. It's not about never speaking, but about choosing the right words for each moment. Have we been using our words to edify, or have we been speaking without thinking, causing unnecessary harm? Wisdom in speaking begins with listening. Before we speak, we need to listen. James 1:19 reminds us to be quick to hear before we are slow to speak. This means giving each other space, understanding the situation, and allowing the Holy Spirit to guide us in what to say. How many times do we respond in the heat of the moment, only to regret it later? Wisdom teaches us to pause, reflect, and choose words that bring life, not destruction. And wisdom in speech is also linked to purpose. Every word we say should have a purpose, to edify, console, encourage, or teach. Jesus never talked the talk. Each of his words had a weight, a meaning, a purpose. He knew when to console, when to confront, and when to silence. Have we sought this same sensitivity in our conversations? Are we allowing God to guide us in the use of words? Finally, using words wisely is a reflection of our spiritual maturity. It is the result of a heart transformed and aligned with God's will. When we seek His wisdom, our words become an extension of His love, His grace, and His truth. What kind of impact do we want to leave? Every word is an opportunity to build something eternal. Wisdom invites us to choose carefully, knowing that our words have power and that, when guided by God, they can transform lives. Words have immense power, don't they? Today, we saw how they can create, heal, destroy, or restore. And the most incredible thing is that God gave us this power to use with wisdom and love. Think about everything that was said, how your words can bring hope, how a simple "forgive me" can transform a relationship, or how silence can be stronger than any sentence. Every choice we make with our words is an opportunity to reflect God's heart and impact the world around us. And you know what's most exciting? It's just that we can start using that power right now by being more intentional, caring, and loving in every conversation we have. If this video touched your heart and made you reflect, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any content like this. I also want to hear from you. What struck you most about today's video? Leave it here in the comments, because your words can inspire other people too. And of course, share this video with friends and family who need to hear this message. Let's spread the power of words of life together.